What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 of my favorite games for 2023, which naturally does come with a few caveats. Probably the biggest simply being that everyone knows my favorite game this year was Baldur's Gate 3, like a great many people as well, but I've talked about that many times, it's certainly not a surprise. So for the sake of this video, I thought, let's just set that aside for a minute and make this a slightly more interesting watch. So yes, Baldur's Gate 3 was my favorite, and the rest of this video is basically numbers 2 through 6. Because as great as Baldur's Gate 3 was, there were a ton of great games released this year that make it somewhat hard to believe that there was a shocking amount of industry-wide layoffs. It also kind of goes without saying that I'm only talking about games that released this year, because while I do play and review older titles all the time, the last 6 months or so you would hardly be able to know that because I've done nothing but review new releases, because there were so many. So while an upcoming video will rank every game I reviewed this year for fun, which will include older titles, this is just this year's stuff. But with no further ado, let's dive into it. First and foremost, with our last spot, we have Jagged Alliance 3. Just making it onto the list, Jagged Alliance 3 is a combination of CRPG and TRPG, and of course a sequel to a beloved cult classic franchise, the Jagged Alliance 1 and 2. 2 more specifically, as it was very popular, but it was quite old, with its initial release being all the way back in 1999. And while they have tried to release other games in the series, none of them have been well received, let's say. Until, of course, Jagged Alliance 3. An interesting series overall, though. A lot of it kind of leans into the style of 80s action movies where everything is very over the top, but this particular title puts us in the role of a mercenary company, if you will, or at least a single individual who happens to be hiring teams of mercenaries who act as our party members, each of which has their own distinctive personalities and skill sets that you can utilize to help bring peace and stability to Grand Chien, a fictional country undergoing a multitude of problems. And what's really cool about this game, and the reason it made it onto this list, is that how you deal with many of those individual problems will affect what happens to the country afterwards. So while you can just follow the main objectives and take care of problems, chances are the country will still be left in a pretty terrible state if you ignore all of the other issues at play. So there's a surprising amount of choice and consequence in this game at the same time. While there were a few nitpicky things here and there, such as the ability to cheese a lot of stuff very easily, sniper rifles being very overpowered, etc. A lot of that isn't really unique to this game. Many games suffer from similar problems, so it didn't really cut into the fun I had with it as a whole. But believe it or not, there's more to come. I believe this game is actually getting a DLC on the 18th of December, so I'll probably make a video on that, as I did enjoy it quite a bit. Moving right along to our next spot, however, we have Lies of P. A bit of a sleeper hit Souls-like, based loosely on the fable, if you will, of Pinocchio, where we play a puppet going around the island of Krat, which is suffering from both a plague and an outbreak of puppets attacking everyone, which we naturally get involved in typically Souls-like combat that is remarkably well done. In many ways, you could confuse this game with any other From Software game, which gave the genre its namesake. But what I personally enjoyed about it the most was the weapon crafting, if you will, where you can take any weapon, which is divided up into blades and handles, and mix and match them to create combinations of weapons and attacks that you might not have thought of, while also using a few different items to change the stat scaling of any individual weapon to tailor it to a particular build as well. And while the game can run into typical problems of the genre, issues with the camera, lock-ons, things like that, it was otherwise a genuinely great game that I had a ton of fun with, even if it was a bit linear. All in all, they really managed to capture the essence of what made games like Dark Souls what they are, with that slow, methodical approach if you want, or something a little more light and fast. So there's a bunch of ways to build a character and move through a bizarre world. And if the teaser at the end of the game is anything to go by, we might see more of this universe yet. Which does bring us to our third entry though, and this one is Aliens Dark Descent. A real-time TRPG, which already makes it a bit of a rarity, that I think managed to really capture the stress and anxiety of someone in the situation of having to deal with the aliens of the Aliens franchise that the movies especially are so well known for. And as you fight off an infestation of these things, the game mechanics, both in terms of taking care of your Marines who have to actually fight these things, dealing with their own psychological traumas, on top of the more oppressive and ever-evolving situation in terms of actually fighting them on the ground, as in missions, the more you engage with them, the more you rile up the hive and the more they come after you a bit more aggressively each time, puts a lot of pressure on you as a player to accomplish objectives while at the same time trying to minimize your contact with these things, which can be done in a variety of ways, and it leads to a system that is both unique among its genre, while at the same time staying true to the franchise as a whole in a way that I just really wasn't expecting a game like this to be able to do, which was probably the most surprising thing about it. And in many ways, this game, I would say, accomplishes things that I wanted from the only other really real-time with pause TRPG of recent note, which was the Diofield Chronicle. And while that's a very different game overall, its real-time with pause system and its ERPG setting just didn't quite manage to provide a significant amount of challenge, etc. So it was nice to see a game actually get that feedback loop just right, which is why I liked Dark Descent so much. But that brings us to number 2, with what may be a surprising entry for some people, which is Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. If you watch this channel at all, you know I love a good CRPG. Owlcat have made one of my favorites as well, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. So another CRPG from people who have made one of my favorites seems like a no-brainer, and in many ways I think they delivered on that. Now it does have the typical hallmark issues. I think there's a variety of minor bugs that might bother you, but beyond that, if you like Warhammer 40k and you like CRPGs, I think Rogue Trader is fantastic. I also think simply the concept of a rogue trader in that universe makes for a really great setup to what a CRPG could be about anyway. So between all the options for character building, the different story paths via your convictions options, alongside combat that I think is really enjoyable, utilizing a momentum system that Owlcat came up with that I liked quite a bit, even if it is a bit slow at times due to the number of enemies, there is a ton about this game to enjoy. So what's it doing in the number 2 spot? Well, if I may offer some speculation, and that's what this is, speculation. I have no idea. This is just personal thoughts that I had whilst playing, which is that I think Games Workshop may have sort of sandbagged them a little bit with what they were allowed to do here, because we see characters like Argenta, our Sister of Battle companion, that despite it being a CRPG, you can't romance, there's no option to see her go down a dark path and perhaps fall into a different way of being, that I think would have made a ton of sense for a CRPG. And that's just one example of many of those situations. And given that when they first started doing the alpha and beta and stuff, it did kind of seem like they were headed in that direction where you could at least like romance characters like Argenta. It did seem like they kind of pulled back from that all of a sudden, like a couple months from release. But if I had to pinpoint any particular reason I would say this is in the number 2 spot, that would be why. Which does, however, bring us to our number 1 spot, which is, maybe shockingly for some people, actually Octopath Traveller 2. A JRPG from the beginning of the year roughly, and of course a follow-up to the much beloved Octopath Traveller. I obviously loved the second entry here. I thought it was great, and I think a lot of that is, truth be told, a little bit of nostalgia. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned this on the channel, but many of the first games I ever completed were actually some of the Final Fantasy titles, so I've always enjoyed games of that type, even if I don't cover them a ton on the channel, usually because they don't come to PC, which is my platform of preference. So I was pretty excited to see this one actually launch on PC, and I was not disappointed at all. I think Octopath Traveller 2 in many ways modernizes a lot of those systems that you saw from games like that of yesteryear, that I myself grew up playing quite a few of, and combined with a world that's fun to explore, combat that is pretty engaging with its lock system and breaking them down to weaken enemies, the very sort of iconic HD 2D graphic setup that they've been pioneering that I think honestly looks great. I love a good bit of pixel art, and the simple fact that the game ran flawlessly day one, which this year is honestly a bit of an underrated feature, all make for a game that I really loved from start to finish. And while much like any game, it's certainly not for everyone, I had a blast with it, and I think this game deserves infinitely more praise than it wound up getting. as it was a tremendous title. Really, my only complaint personally was that some of the pacing for the story missions could be off a little bit in terms of levels at times, but that's going to come down to how you approach and play the game. So if you like JRPGs at all, you should absolutely play this one, which is what it's doing at the top of my list, discounting, of course, BG3. But that is pretty much going to do it for this video, so I certainly hope you enjoyed it. I know I certainly enjoyed playing these games and reviewing them for you this year, and it's always fun to share which ones I enjoyed the most. But with that exact thing in mind, do remember that I will be ranking every game I reviewed this year here in probably a week or so, which will include everything from new and old, which will be a little shy of 60 titles, I believe. Like 57 or 58, I think. But in the meantime, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know down below how you felt about any of these titles. What were your favorite games of this year, as it was a tremendous year for game releases. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.